If you love thrilling road trips, you might want to listen closely, especially if you're the type who enjoys riding out to places like Vung Tau. Imagine a journey that begins as a normal adventure and takes a dark turn into the unknown. This is one such tale, full of unexpected events that will leave you wondering if you dare to take that path again. This story was shared by someone who took a motorcycle road trip with friends from Ben Tre to Vung Tau. The plan was to start late in the afternoon, around 3 p.m., and head through Saigon before continuing on to Vung Tau. It sounded like the perfect adventure, but not everything went according to plan. With 2 motorcycles carrying 4 friends, things already got off track when 2 of the group decided they didn't want to continue beyond Saigon. But our storyteller and their girlfriend were determined to reach Vung Tau that night. By the time they reached Cat Lai Ferry, it was already dark, nearly 7:30 p.m. Upon crossing the ferry, the couple decided to use Google Maps to find a quicker route. What could possibly go wrong with modern technology on their side, right? Unfortunately, that was where things started to get eerie. Google Maps led them down some narrow, dimly lit paths, shortcuts that seemed to snake deeper and deeper into nowhere. Soon, the road became more isolated, and there were no more houses, just stretches of deserted rubber plantations on both sides. The darkness deepened, and as the rain began to fall, the situation became even more unsettling. It wasn't long before they ended up at the entrance to a military area, where 2 guards stopped them and informed them they had taken a wrong turn. This was clearly not a public route, and they were instructed to turn back. The couple thanked the guards and reluctantly turned around, now growing increasingly anxious as the rain fell harder. At this point, the roads were not just deserted, they were ghostly. The rubber trees swayed in the wind, and the only sound was the patter of raindrops. Hoping to get back on track, they kept following the map, but the route continued to lead them deeper into rural areas, down roads that turned from asphalt to red dirt, with no lights and no signs of civilization. The rain was now pouring, and it was around 9 p.m. when they passed an abandoned mansion that seemed straight out of a horror movie, eerily similar to the infamous haunted villas in Dalat. Without warning, the bike's engine stalled, and the headlights flickered out, leaving them in total darkness. Panic set in as they tried to restart the bike. The only light was from their phone, which barely cut through the thick darkness. With no other options, they began pushing the motorcycle through the mud and rain, feeling entirely alone amidst the towering rubber trees. Then, the ground gave way, and they found themselves slipping into a ditch, covered in mud and barely able to get out. They were drenched, exhausted, and terrified, but somehow, adrenaline pushed them to keep moving. They pulled the bike back up, and after several failed attempts, it finally roared back to life. They rode as fast as they could, backtracking until they finally reached a gas station. They were soaked and shivering, and the gas station attendant gave them a startled look, asking what on earth they had been doing out there in that weather. When they explained, he shook his head and told them they were lucky. Those roads through the rubber plantations were notorious, not just for eerie stories but also for being dangerous due to bandits. The couple never made it to Vung Tau that night. Instead, they decided to return to Saigon, shaken but grateful to be safe. For a month after that, the storyteller was haunted by what happened, replaying the events and realizing that Google Maps had mistakenly led them down paths meant for pedestrians, not vehicles. But that wasn't the end of the story. The events of that night had triggered something deep within them, a curiosity mixed with dread, a feeling that they had narrowly escaped something far more sinister. Nightmares plagued the storyteller, visions of that abandoned mansion, of shadowy figures moving in the dark, and of voices whispering in the rain. The girlfriend, too, felt the unease, and soon the 2 of them began digging into the history of the area. They discovered that the abandoned mansion they had passed was infamous among locals. Rumors of strange occurrences, disappearances, and even ghost sightings had circulated for years. It was said that the mansion once belonged to a wealthy family who had mysteriously vanished, leaving the house to decay, with only whispers of curses and hauntings remaining. Locals avoided the area, and it was considered a place of bad luck. No one in their right mind would venture near it after dark. Intrigued and unable to shake the feeling that there was more to the story, the couple decided to return to the area during daylight. They enlisted the help of their two friends who had bailed out on the original trip. The friends were reluctant at first, but curiosity got the better of them. They wanted closure to understand what had really happened that night. They set off early one Saturday morning, determined to find the mansion again. As they rode, there was an unspoken tension between them. The friends, who had missed the original ordeal, joked nervously to lighten the mood, but the couple remained focused, their eyes scanning the surroundings for anything familiar. When they finally reached the area, the daylight revealed the landscape in a different light. The rubber trees, which had seemed menacing in the dark, now looked mundane, their trunks standing like silent sentinels. They found the mansion just as they had remembered it, abandoned, with broken windows and ivy crawling up the crumbling walls. The gate was rusted, hanging off its hinges, and the garden was overgrown, nature slowly reclaiming what had once been a symbol of wealth and power. Despite the bright sun overhead, an eerie stillness hung around the place, as if the air itself was holding its breath. As they approached, the couple felt an inexplicable chill. The friends, now visibly uneasy, suggested they just take a few pictures and leave, but the storyteller felt a pull, a need to see inside. They pushed open the gate, which creaked loudly, shattering the silence, and slowly made their way to the front door. It was unlocked, swinging open with a gentle push. Inside, the air was thick, and the smell of mildew and decay was overpowering. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that filtered through the broken windows. The grand staircase in the foyer was cracked, the wood splintering, and the walls were lined with faded, peeling wallpaper. They moved cautiously, the floorboards creaking under their weight, each sound amplified in the oppressive silence. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the house, coming from somewhere upstairs. The friends froze, eyes wide with fear. The girlfriend grabbed the storyteller's arm, her face pale. They exchanged nervous glances, their instincts screaming at them to leave. But before they could turn back, they heard it. A faint voice, almost like a whisper, calling out from the shadows above. The storyteller felt their heart pound in their chest, every muscle in their body tensing. One of the friends, trying to mask his fear, shouted, "Who's there?" His voice echoed, but there was no response. Instead, the air seemed to grow colder, and a sense of dread settled over them like a heavy blanket. They backed away slowly, but as they did, the front door, which had been ajar, suddenly slammed shut with a deafening bang. Panic erupted. The girlfriend screamed, and one of the friends rushed to the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The storyteller's phone flashlight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The voice came again, louder this time, almost desperate, as if pleading. The storyteller couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably sorrowful, filled with anguish. Desperate to escape, they turned and ran towards the back of the house, stumbling through debris and broken furniture. They found a rear door, and with a combined effort, managed to force it open. They burst out into the overgrown garden, gasping for breath, hearts pounding in their ears. Without looking back, they ran to their motorcycles, adrenaline fueling their every step. The engines roared to life, and they sped away, not daring to stop until they were miles from the mansion. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, the friends swore never to speak of what had happened. They were visibly shaken, their faces pale and their hands trembling. The girlfriend, tears streaming down her face, looked at the storyteller, her voice barely a whisper as she asked, "What was that? Who was that?" But there were no answers, only questions that would never be resolved. The experience left them all deeply unsettled. They avoided talking about it, but the nightmares returned, more vivid and terrifying than before. The storyteller dreamt of the mansion, of the voice, of figures standing in the dark corners of the rooms, watching, waiting. The girlfriend insisted they see a spiritual healer, someone who could help them make sense of what had happened, or at the very least offer some protection. The healer, an elderly woman with kind eyes, listened intently as they recounted their experience. She nodded knowingly, her expression grave. She told them that places like the mansion held onto energy, memories of the past, the emotions of those who had lived and died there. She believed that the mansion was haunted by spirits who had not found peace, and that their presence there had disturbed whatever fragile balance existed. She performed a cleansing ritual, giving them charms for protection and advising them never to return to that place. Despite the healer's efforts, the storyteller couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them back. There were strange occurrences. Objects in their apartment moved, lights flickered, and the feeling of being watched lingered. The couple became increasingly paranoid. Their relationship strained under the weight of the fear that had taken root in their lives. The friends, too, distanced themselves, unwilling to be reminded of that day. The final straw came one night when the storyteller woke to find the girlfriend standing in the middle of their bedroom, staring blankly at the wall. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and her lips moved as if she was whispering, but no sound came out. The storyteller called out to her, but she didn't respond. It was only when they shook her that she seemed to snap out of it. Her face contorted in fear as she broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. She said she had seen them, the figures from the mansion, standing at the foot of the bed, watching them. They moved out of the apartment the next day, leaving behind everything that reminded them of that night. They never spoke of the mansion again, and eventually they went their separate ways, the trauma too much for their relationship to bear. The storyteller, now alone, still thinks of that night, of the voice in the darkness, and wonders if perhaps some doors should never be opened, some paths never taken. The storyteller tried to start a new life, but the memories refused to fade. They moved to a different city, hoping the distance would help. However, the strange occurrences seemed to follow, as if something had attached itself to them. At first, it was subtle shadows moving in their peripheral vision, whispers in the dead of night. The storyteller brushed it off as stress, but the incidents grew more intense. One evening, while unpacking in their new apartment, the storyteller heard a soft knock at the door. It was strange. No one knew them in this new city. Hesitant, they opened the door to find no one there, but on the floor lay a single old-fashioned key. It looked familiar, but they couldn't place it. A chill ran down their spine as they realized it resembled the keys they had seen in the mansion, the ones hanging from rusty hooks in the foyer. The key seemed to be a message, a reminder that they couldn't outrun the past. That night, the nightmares returned with a vengeance. The storyteller dreamt of the mansion, but this time, they were not just an observer. They were inside, walking through the dark halls, the walls closing in on them. The whispers were louder, almost deafening, and the sorrowful voice was now distinct. It was calling their name. The next morning, the storyteller woke up drenched in sweat, the key lying on the nightstand beside them. Panic set in. They had thrown the key away the night before, yet here it was, as if mocking them. Desperate, they reached out to the healer once more. The elderly woman's face grew pale when she saw the key. She told them that the spirits were trying to reclaim something, that the connection formed during their visit to the mansion had not been broken. She suggested a more drastic approach, a ritual that would require the storyteller to confront the spirits directly. It was dangerous, she warned, but it might be the only way to sever the bond. The storyteller, exhausted and desperate for peace, agreed. The healer prepared everything: a circle of salt, candles, and a series of chants meant to protect and guide them. That night, as the ritual began, the air grew thick, almost suffocating. The candles flickered, their flames struggling against an unseen force. The storyteller sat in the middle of the salt circle, the key clutched tightly in their hand. The healer's voice was steady as she chanted, her words flowing in an ancient, melodic rhythm. The temperature in the room dropped, and the shadows on the walls began to move, swirling and shifting as if alive. Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder than ever, filled with anger and sorrow. The storyteller felt a pressure on their chest, as if invisible hands were trying to crush the life out of them. The healer's voice grew louder, commanding the spirits to leave, to break their hold. The key in the storyteller's hand began to burn, the metal searing their palm, but they held on, knowing it was the only way. The room seemed to warp, the walls bending inwards, the shadows growing until they engulfed everything. The storyteller could barely breathe, their vision blurring, but they focused on the healer's voice, on the light of the candles. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pressure lifted. The shadows receded, the room returning to normal. The key fell from the storyteller's hand, now cool to the touch, and lay on the floor, lifeless. The healer smiled weakly, her face lined with exhaustion. She told the storyteller that the bond had been broken, that the spirits had finally let go. Relief washed over the storyteller, a weight lifting from their shoulders. They thanked the healer, tears streaming down their face, grateful to finally be free. In the weeks that followed, the strange occurrences stopped. The nightmares faded, and the sense of being watched disappeared. The storyteller began to rebuild their life, slowly, cautiously. They knew they would never forget what had happened, that the memories would always be there, lurking in the corners of their mind. But for the first time in a long time, they felt at peace. So, if you ever find yourself heading towards Vung Tau via Cat Lai Ferry, take heed. Sometimes the quickest route isn't the safest, and a shortcut through the dark can lead you to places you never wanted to be. And if you ever come across an abandoned mansion, remember, some doors are better left unopened, and some mysteries are best left unsolved.